Hello everybody, hope you're okay. Now, I haven't done any YouTuber news for a while. Well, the big news is that also you've got the London Marathon and the Manchester Marathon on Sunday, and so I thought I would do a bit of a preview of some of the leading YouTubers, have a look at their training, and basically give you my estimates of what I think they're going to do, because I know you like that. Okay, so who am I going to feature? Well, we've got Nick Bester, who I usually cover. We've got Cole Gibbens. Cole is running on his marathon debut. Should be a very interesting one. Ben Felton, looking in very good shape. Also, we've got Phily Bowden, also looking very good, and also be her debut in a marathon major, and she's also on the elite women's start, so that's going to be very interesting. We've got Ben Parks as usual, and we've also got Edd Bud doing his debut, well, sort of debut, because he's had a marathon before that he did not finish, so I hope he manages to get around. Now, the first five, other than Ed, are doing London, and Ed is doing Manchester. So this is my summary of all these people. Now, interestingly, Nick, Cole and Ben, I think, according to what they've said on their YouTube, are secretly hoping they're going to run 2:18 something. So I've put the targets here as what I think are the upper end of their aspirations. I think someone like Cole was really hoping to break 2:20. I think Nick is really hoping to do a PB, and I think Ben Felton is looking to do a very big PB and see how far under his PB he can get. Phily Bowden, I think, has got aspirations at the very top end of aspirations to make the World Championships qualifying time, which is 2:23 for the A standard, and I think it's about 2:24 for the B standard. So she's going to need somewhere around that. Beyond clear what Ben Parks' target is going to be. I think it's probably going to be around 250, something like that, maybe sub 250. And Edd Bud, according to his pace, looks like he's trying to run sub 320. Now, all of these runners, the first four, you would kind of say really are on top of the game. I mean, you would argue that obviously Phily Bowden is the best runner of all these six because she's a female and she's very much an elite runner. The first three, Nick, Cole and Ben, there are very much sub-elite runners. And then we've got Ben Parks, who probably now would say was a former sub-elite runner, now is just a very good runner. And Edd Bud is clearly a very good sort of club standard runner. Maybe not quite yet fully au fait with the marathon. So if you look at these average mileages here, the first four are all hovering around 100 miles. It's really, really impressive training when we dive into a bit more. And I've put some extra summary stats there. So I'll go on to each of these six in turn, have a bit more look at their training. And I put my predictions up there on the right. I think pretty much I would say that Nick is in good form, but just not quite sure if he's on top form. Cole Gibbens could be very unpredictable. He could do really, really well, or he may struggle on his debut, so it's a bit of an unknown. Ben Felton's looking in the best marathon shape I've seen him, and has had extended trips to Kenya, so he's looking good, but again, hasn't really excelled at the marathon in the past. So again, it's a bit of an unknown quantity, and the marathon's such an unpredictable event. And Philly, I think, will be in very good shape, but I think she may possibly struggle by the fact that it's a very small elite women's field, and that could get spread out very quickly. She could find herself running on her own. Ben Parks has been at the Expo all week and has just run Paris Marathon. But Ben is probably the most experienced marathon runner of everyone here, really. I think he's done getting on for 100 marathons. He might be in the 100 Marathon Club before long. And Edd Bud, well, I think Ed's a bit optimistic, but if you look at the figures here, maybe that his best aim is to get around as best as he can. But anyway, good luck to everyone. So let's have a look at each of these in turn. So what I've done, as usual, I've got the 14 weeks leading up to the race, and the 14th week, i.e. this week, I've excluded because it's the taper week. So basically, as usual, I've looked at all their training for the 13 weeks of the block. Obviously, everyone's training has a slightly different block, but to standardise things, I keep to like the last 14 weeks. So I think it's a fairly standard type of affair. I think, though, in Nick's case, he probably really sort of honed up on his marathon training from about the start of March here. You can see that his mileage considerably jumped up. He did say in his own analysis that he's done more miles this time than before. I think what he really means, he's done more in his peak weeks. You see he's got a peak week there of 124. I think that when he was out in the training camp, and he did the Limassol Marathon there in 2:28:54 at the back end of it as a sort of a solo training run. I think he came second, was homing in on the winner. So that kind of gives an indication of his like minimum shape. Clearly that wasn't an all-out effort in reasonably warm conditions, although it is looking sort of fairly warm this weekend, isn't it? So yeah, but also Nick really does like to race quite frequently, and I would say his most significant race indicator is probably the Cambridge Half Marathon, 67.15 this year. He's previously won it in a low 66, so it's just he's not quite in peak form for the shorter races, but he did a very impressive 14.36 there in the Battersea 5k, and he won his sort of hometown Winchester Hilly 10k in 31.48, and a couple of other solid half marathons there. But you kind of think on the basis of that, trying to do a PB of sub 2:29.45 may be a bit tricky, but maybe this time he's sort of like held back last couple of weeks, and yeah, maybe he should surprise us. And I think he's very good now at running around about 2:20. I think now, having had the pressure of actually getting that target, which has been on his back for some years, he could surprise us. But equally, you kind of look at this and think, well, maybe not quite in the right shape to hold on to the likes of Cole and Ben, who look to be in slightly better shape at the shorter distances. But yeah, we'll still see. The experience may tell. The shoes, he's got the Adios Pro Evo 1, so pretty much the lightest shoe on the market as a marathon racer. So, although the Evo 2 is now out to the select few of Adidas Elites, although Nick is a sponsored athlete, well, not sponsored, more supported, should we say. I think it's more, because the correct term hasn't obviously managed to get a pair of the Evo 2s yet, but I don't think it'll be an excuse wearing the Evo 1s for sure. So yeah, interesting to see how he goes. And average pace there was 6:30, and I've just put in these elevations from Strava. Sometimes I've had to sort of take out the odd bike ride, or Nick does a bit of Pilates each week. So all these times here are basically just the run times. I don't think Nick had too much training effect from non-running activities. I think all the things he did were like things like Pilates. So good for like general conditioning, but not really obviously going to improve your cardiac fitness, as it were, as opposed to maybe cycling or stuff like that may do. Now, moving on to Cole, I think this is going to be the most interesting one. I would have to say, of all the men here, I would say he's the most talented runner, and I think you just look at that by the fact that some of these PBs here, Paddock Wood half marathon, winning it in 65 minutes exactly. I think he was a bit annoyed if the chip time didn't come through to 64.59 as it had originally. But yeah, I mean, that is some running, isn't it? I mean, when you consider that would have been maybe 10 years ago kind of elite level domestic sort of performance. I mean, these days 65 minutes is still extremely quick, but bordering on the sort of borderline between elite and sub-elite. And then you've got some very impressive, a sub 30 10k is also a classic sign of some good running, and a 14:23 5k. So the thing will be for his, can he actually last the course? But if you actually look at some of these weekly mileages here, he actually peaked at a phenomenal 139 with 138 backed up, and what's that, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 weeks in a row, 100 miles or more, with another one there. So that is phenomenal running for somebody who has never really done this level of running before in terms of like actual volume. And it's interesting, the training paces, they're very similar to Nick Bester, around about the 6:30 mark. You have to take some of these averages with a pinch of salt, because I hope I managed to sort of take out all the extra bits. Cole does a little bit of biking, just more to sort of like loosen legs. I wouldn't really say there's too much of a training effect there, but I think sometimes he'd just had a little bike maybe once or twice a week just to sort of help flush out the legs. But yeah, I mean, I think none of his training I didn't think was sort of overly spectacular. Obviously he had some very spectacular races. Obviously just this massive mileage must be giving a good boost there. But I did highlight one session recently which does suggest that a 2:18-ish time may be possible. 3x10k with 1k float, averaging 3:16, which is pretty much bang on 2:18 marathon pace. So that, I'm sure, would have been a very encouraging run. The only time that he sort of like went like a long run, it wasn't actually a great run, but having said that, it was literally the day after he did a PB at the 5k, so that's a very demanding week, isn't it? And I think he actually recorded there a time of 2:34 moving, but he actually did 3:10 actual time, so have to take that sort of average pace with a bit of salt. But at least he has sort of got these long runs in, perhaps a bit more traditional. Also that he did the national cross country. Some of the long runs I thought were more time on feel, not quite so much this sort of vogue now for every long run must include periods of marathon pace. I think there were some like that, but yeah, I mean the sheer amount of volume of training, I think, and building up a huge aerobic base is going to be, or at least it should be, really, really good for the marathon. He's had a bit of a last minute problem with a sore knee. Interestingly, he's a physio, so help yourself to sort of self-diagnosing himself. But from what I read on Strava and his latest video, he seems hopefully to have got over that. So yeah, I think the only thing with Cole will be is can he last the course, and will he hopefully not get too carried away, because I think he's talking about going through halfway in 68 minutes, which gives him a 3-minute buffer in his half marathon form, which is put him a lot more than Ben Felton and Nick would have in their locker, as it were. So moving on to Ben Felton. Now, interestingly, he spent more than half the period in Kenya in 2 blocks. I think he first went to Kenya back end of January and February, largely as a prelude to running the Barcelona half marathon, which he did a very fine PB of 66.23. That was really the only race he did sort of like a long distance. He did a very credible 14.46 Battersea 5k a couple of weeks later, which was only just 4 seconds outside his PB. So certainly his form there at the sort of mid to short distances are looking good. And I think when I look at the average paces there, you have to remember that a lot of his training, as I said, was in Kenya. So the paces, obviously being at high altitude and probably the sort of more sort of tracks than roads there, will be a bit slower. So don't perhaps read too much into that. And perhaps also with the overall mileage. I mean, there's plenty of weeks there are over 100 miles, some of which were in Kenya as well. So in that sense, some huge volume of training here. And I don't think Ben really has had too many problems with injuries. He had a quad niggle there in that week, middle of March, but I think since then he's been okay. And I saw his last YouTube video. He did like a sort of fairly light tune-up session. I think it was 4x6 minutes at marathon pace, and he was very pleased with his very low heart rate and lactate, although I'm not quite sure how much you can really read into 4 miles at marathon pace with rest. I mean, I think when I was doing that would have been about 6-minute miles. I think I could have done 6-minute miles in my sleep if that one off with a rest. So yeah, but good confidence boost. Interestingly, he's managed to get himself a pair of the Puma Fastar Nitro Elite 3, which are incredibly hyped up shoe. A lot of claims that it's the fastest shoe ever. I managed to actually order one, hasn't come yet, so I'll be keen to see how I do there. He's got a sort of an ambitious target of 218. I think that's really a stretch target. I think he said it was sort of somewhere in the range of 218 to 222, and I think he said he'll be going out at 218. Now, it's a bit of a long range, isn't it? 218 to 222, because if you set out at 218 and end up with 222, it does suggest that somewhere on the line you really have died a bit of a death. So I hope don't get too carried away. Don't forget his PB is 224, albeit from Boston, one of the harder courses for sure. He's clearly his best form, I think, that he has been for some time, maybe ever, at the marathon and these extended trips in Kenya. It'll be interesting to see how he comes off that. Some people may not necessarily work for them, but he's now pretty used to going there, so hopefully that will work out. So it's going to be very interesting. Now, Phily Bowden's the only female I've managed to feature this time. I know Holly Archer's also running, does a bit of YouTube, but when I looked on our Strava, it clearly wasn't complete, so I didn't think there was much point trying to analyse her training. Now, Phily this time has actually made all her training available on Strava. I think in the past she's kind of only had selected runs on there, so very interesting to see that. I would say this is probably the most consistent of all the training here. I mean, as you can see that the weekly mileages are very, very even and extremely impressive. A lot of weeks here, again, above 100 miles, isn't there? How many have we got there? 8 in a row. You can almost say it was like 10, because there's 100 there and 98 preceding it. And she does most of her training in this period in Flagstaff in the States, which I think is a slight altitude, quite a mecca for running in the States. People like Rory Linklater, who did very well in the Boston Marathon for Puma, although Phily is an on-athlete, and I saw she was training with Colleen Quigley as well. I think the former probably still is steeplechaser from the States. So yeah, some good stable of runners out there. And her PB was 225 from Berlin, and I think she's clearly had the best training block for any marathon. I think she's done now 4, so I think this will be her 5th one. I think she's PB'd every time. And it's going to be very interesting, I think, because this time it's going to be her first time, I think, in a a women-only elite start. So I think from what I've observed in that, then there'll be like a lead pack, but then there'll probably be the British people probably forming a pack, bit of a distance behind, and hopefully we'll have some dedicated female pacemakers. I think the whole point of the female-only start is to potentially, if there is a female-only world record, then it will sort of effectively count. Because you remember when Paula Radcliffe won it years ago, she had a couple of male pacemakers, so that only obviously counted as the women record, like effectively an open situation rather than women only. And I think because Phily is a bit of an altitude there and perhaps doesn't get too carried away with the training, her average pace is 7:25 there, which I think is pretty conservative. If we look onto Ben Parks in a minute, I think he actually runs a faster pace and clearly will be nowhere near targeting the times that Phily is. So that's interesting in itself. Not many races from Phily on the block here. There's only really two. And I think the Mesa half marathon there, when she did 72:33, I think she was under instructions from her coach to actually not race that flat out. So you could argue that her target's 2:23. She's trying to run faster than she ran a half marathon in. So yeah, that's a bit of a question mark in my head there. How much effort was she really putting into that half marathon? I'm not quite sure of the conditions. Maybe it wasn't the best of courses in terms of speed, but that was quite a long time ago, so she's had a lot of training since. I think a better indicator is the recent 6-stage road relay. I think it's a notional 5k, but a quite hilly one. Now 16:52 doesn't really sort of set too much impressive alarm bells in your head, but apparently it was the second fastest on the day, and I think probably one of the fastest ever there. And in comparison, Jake Smith has got the best time by a male, at least recently, and it's only 14:28. And Jake, I think on his day, could easily run a 5k best part of a minute quicker than that. So again, that suggests that time, not read too much into that. And, obviously she's training for a marathon, not a 5k. So it's all good indication. I think perhaps a better indication there, some of the sessions here, we had a long run, including 14 miles at 5:50 pace. So that's getting down to the sort of level required to run a 2:23, isn't it? And then there's a 12 mile there with 3 mile pickups, 18:20, 18:01, 17:51, 17:47. So yeah, again, about that 6-minute mile pace, which is coming in at about 2:35, isn't it? So again, I think that was also at altitude, so in Flagstaff, or at least sort of semi-altitude. So probably not the best of conditions. And then we had another long run there where I think she sort of did 21 miles in the day with a warm up and a warm down in the middle bit, 14 miles at 5:59. So I think in some ways, although the mileage is really high here, it's perhaps the most sort of traditional type of training. I saw a few track sessions, like sort of series of quite full lots of 400s, I think starting at about 82nd and working down to sort of 70, 71. So nothing spectacular, but good volume sessions. I think that is often the case with marathon training. You don't want to sort of like look at this and see 1 or 2 amazing sessions and not much else. You just want to see consistent mileage, just getting that huge aerobic base. And I saw her video, and interestingly, she was quite buoyant about her targets. And I think in the past she's been a bit maybe more reserved about them. But I think it's always a good sign when athletes put those targets out, because someone like in social media is always going to be a problem getting that sort of credibility when you say a target and you don't often believe it. But you look at this training and think, well, yeah, and there's 100 miles a week, averaging 103 over a 13-week period. That is impressive stuff for sure, isn't it? So yeah, very interesting to see how she does. I think, as I said, the biggest problem is going to be, will she end up in a sort of like no person's land, as it were, no man's land, because it's a women-only race, isn't it? Anyway, so Ben Parks obviously is not quite in the form that he was when he did his 2:25 in Valencia. I think it was 2018 now, but he's still very much a prominent sub-3 marathon runner. And indeed, as you can see there, he was in the Paris Marathon literally the other week, did 2:57, and I think clearly was holding back there. It looks at the average pace, it seemed to be very solid, so I don't think he was really going out and had died and had just said it was easy. You wonder though, because he's now sort of quite keen to go to the expo, and he's got a stand with Sarah, so he'll be there all week, and that is really tiring, being on your feet all day. So in that sense, I don't think he's really probably looking to London to be his sort of goal race. I think he's entered the Comrades Marathon, which is perhaps why he's also did that 50k trail race. I don't think he'd really sort of race that one flat out. I think it was more like a time on feet race in an environment where it's a bit more pleasant than just running 50k on your own on the road. So yeah, I think a credible performance there. But yeah, I think in terms of his training, I always wonder with Ben, he seems very, very comfortable running at 7-minute mile pace. You see almost every day he's running, say, an hour at 7-minute mile pace. I think sometimes he stops and does a bit of filming. But, he even says that 7-minute miling is a jog. And if you compare there the 7:20, his average training pace, and don't forget, a lot of this is actually in central London on the flat. I think the only weeks that it was like not around 7 minutes is when he did that trail race there. Obviously that was pulled down the average pace, and I think this week he must have been somewhere else as well. But you can see most weeks other than that, the average pace is around 7 minutes. So 7:20 is perhaps skewed by some of these weeks. So, but yeah, I mean, he seems very comfortable at that pace. And you think, well, actually, in the Paris Marathon doing 2:57, you're not running hugely much faster than you are a 7-minute pace. That would be about a 6:45, something like that, wouldn't it? So yeah, he's clearly very, very comfortable running at that pace. He doesn't seem to do too many sessions. I think he's had a few injuries in the last year or two, so yeah, maybe he's just sort of like being cautious there and just want to get a solid base in. And as I said, I think he's more this week looking to build his business as well as running a stellar London Marathon, but I'm sure it'll probably be around about the 250 mark. I think probably they'd hope to dip under 250. I think he did 248 last year, so I think also his training is looks to have got better in the last few weeks. If you look on Strava, it does like sort of a bit of a ramp up. I think he had a few injury issues at the start of this year. I think he did a 10k, didn't he? We had to just sort of staggered over the line because he hurt his something at the end, and I think it took a while to recover from that. But you can see that the mileage recently has been pretty solid, averaging 60, 78, even an 81 there. So yeah, all looking very good. And Edd Bud, in contrast, perhaps you might say there's a bit of a correlation here between how many miles people run and their likely finishing time. Now, Edd seems a bit light on training at the moment. Edd, he's only averaged 33 miles for the training block. I think he had a few sort of illness issues, a bit like me at the start of the year, so I think his mileage hasn't really got too much more than a peak there of 42, and he hasn't done too many long runs. Now, he doesn't seem to be too concerned about that. I think he's sort of looking mainly to actually get around a marathon. Because if you remember, he did a marathon, I think it was Brighton, wasn't it? And he had to pull out because I think he had a bit of an injury. I think he sort of like run into a pothole and really just got to the point where he just couldn't keep going. So I think his main target will be to actually finish this time. And I think he said in his video that he's looking to run a pace which I worked out was just under 3:20. Now, I think that may be slightly ambitious, because when I look at his long runs here and what he's been doing, I mean, I think the fastest he's actually run over a longer period is when he did the Oval Half Marathon. He had a few quad issues in that one, so I hope they've cleared up. He's wearing the Alpha Phi 3, seems to be his favourite one. It's not really a shoe that I've got on well with at all, and I think I found that just quite almost too much shoe for any distance. So yeah, I'm interested to see how he goes in that one. It does also have the Puma Farstar Nitro Elite 3 has come in, and I think he was sort of pondering whether to use that one. It's probably best to go in the Alpha Fly 3 because it's a shoe that he likes and hopefully he's familiar with. I just feel that he needs to be slightly cautious here and perhaps rein in the enthusiasm. I think there was talk of him trying to sort of accelerate through the race. I think, in all honesty, if you haven't done a huge amount of the mileage or long runs, you're going to find that maybe the legs aren't quite as used to running for that distance as you think. So yeah, just hoping he'll do a solid run and yeah, not to get too carried away with the ambitions. I think the ambitions really will be to get a good solid run in and then always get your first marathon in and then build for later. So who else have we got? I mentioned Holly Archer. We've got people like Jake Smith who occasionally appear on YouTube. We've got Larger Than Running, Orby Running, who's also done Boston, hasn't he, recently? Yeah, he did all right in Boston. I thought it was about 4:29, wasn't it? I think, so I think London's going to be a struggle with the legs. London was probably a faster course, and it's more or less hometown for Aubrey. So yeah, I'm sure his aim will be to get round, and I'm not going to predict a time for Aubrey because I don't think really the time will be the order of day for him. We've got the YouTuber who can't name. I'm sure he'll be going for a bit of goal pace. And people like Phil Seisman will perhaps be leading the British charge along with Jake Smith. So yeah, it's going to be a very interesting race all round. I think also in the women we've got Charlotte Purdy, who's been injured for quite a while, so it'll be interesting to see how she goes. I haven't really got much of a forward guide from her. Also in the women we've got Rose Harvey, who is a Puma athlete, so it'll be interesting to see how she goes in the Puma shoes. We've also got my friend Joseph Gonzalez, who's had a bit of a last minute injury problem, so hopefully you can actually get to the line and have a good solid run out. I think his sort of aspirations may have had to be dimmed. So yeah, I just hope that goes well. And also Joseph reminded me to mention Kevin Quinn, his coach, who could be another athlete looking for a sub 220. He was a masters athlete, 40 plus. I mean, he's going extremely well. I don't know how some of these runners run so well as they do. Get into ages approaching me. Well, obviously he's a bit younger than me, but yeah, you know what I mean. Some people seem to be able to keep going longer. They seem to be getting faster as they get older, whereas I definitely seem to be slowing up. Anyway, good luck to all the runners. Hope I haven't missed out anyone that you know. Let me know anyone else. And what do you think of my predictions? What do you think of the analysis of the training here? Which people do you think will run well? Which people may struggle a bit? Which people may be just out for a nice day out? Anyway, I'm looking forward to the race on Sunday. And I think that it's going to be quite a nice weather, isn't it? Well, to watch, maybe a bit warm for the runners. So, yeah, I hope that's not going to be a factor. I think it was quite as warm as it was in 2018. But I think by the midday, that could be quite a bit of heat compared to, inverted commas, compared to how it was in the winter. But it is what it is. So, as I said, good luck to the runners. Anyway, hope you found this interesting. Like and subscribe to that. And see you next one then. Bye.